Welcome to the All for Literacy podcast, hosted by Dr. Liz Brooke, welcoming established and emerging voices in literacy education and the science of reading. Explore with us the connections between literacy research, educators' knowledge and skills, and the implementation into classroom instruction.
I think schools and districts really need to listen and specifically ask their teachers, what are the barriers to putting this in place? What do you need to actually make this happen?
You've just heard Dr. Adrea Truckenmiller, Associate Professor at Michigan State University and co-developer of the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, MTSS, MA degree program. Today, she joins Dr. Liz Brooke in a conversation about how education research is informing teacher education, professional development, and the sustainable implementation of the science of reading. Here's your host, Dr. Liz Brooke.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the All for Literacy podcast. We are coming together to connect new and established research with educators who apply those ideas daily in our schools. And as we work to improve access to effective literacy education, it is essential that we work collaboratively and collectively towards sustainable implementation of evidence-based literacy education. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Adrea Truckenmiller. I'm so excited to have you, an associate professor at Michigan State University and co-developer of the Multi-Tiered System of Support, MTSS, master's degree program. Welcome, Adrea, and thanks for spending some time with me today.
Hi, Liz. I'm so delighted to get the opportunity to chat with you and everybody today.
Thanks so much. So we always like to start these podcast episodes by asking the same question is, how did you get inspired, or what was your interest in education as a profession?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I never thought I would end up being here as a professor in an education school. That would be a very big surprise to teenage Adrea. But there's a couple of threads and a couple of meandering paths that got me here. I've always been fascinated by figuring out how people learn, and this happened from a young age. I was pretty far from that as a kid. I grew up on a dairy farm, as you know. And I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and feed the cows and help my dad finish with the milking before I would go to school. But I was always really interested in the science part of things. So my family always encouraged that piece of things too. Most people in my hometown, they worked on the farm, they worked in manufacturing. All the women I knew were either secretaries or stay-at-home moms, or there were some teachers, of course, but I never really thought about that as a profession. But my family, especially my Nana and my aunts and my mom, were always very into science. And it sticks out in my head that a guidance counselor once said to my Nana, "I don't understand your girls. They're not like the other girls. They don't want to be secretaries or teachers. They're really interested in science." And she's like, "Yeah, that's right. They're interested in science." And so that's always been a big piece for me. And then I always sought out where was the greatest need and where was the greatest opportunity to apply that science to the most people possible. And public schools are a really amazing place for that. But while I was in graduate school, I had an absolutely incredible advisor, Dr. Tanya Eckert, who saw that in me, the research skills that I had, and said, "Adrea, you're going to be a researcher." And she said that to me all the time while I was in grad school. I didn't see it until long after grad school, going to the Florida Center for Reading Research, where I worked in your job, Liz.
Yes.
after you left FCRR. So It took a little while, but I'm very grateful for Dr. Eckert and for my family who are very interested in science, and I finally found my spot in science where I can serve the greatest need and have the greatest opportunity to do that. So I'm lucky to be here.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I love the story about your Nana and talking about how her girls are interested in science. That's so powerful. And then your advisor, Dr. Eckert, I found that too, that every step of the way there were different mentors and helping shape and our interests and got us to the place we're supposed to be. And yes, for those who missed that connection, Adrea and I were both at FCRR, not at the same time, but she came in when I left in 2010 to join Lexia. Adrea came in to a very similar role that I was in. So that's a nice connection between us and all the mentors we had at FCRR. Dr. Joe Torgeson and Barbara Foreman, all of them just also continued to help shape our paths, I'm sure. And so you talked about the science and talked about public schools, and you've talked about the difficulty of applying research or the science in schools because of the multitude of factors that educators must consider. So what does sustainable implementation of research-backed literacy practices look like in the real-world classroom setting?
Yeah, that is the $1,000,000 question, and one that will keep us in a job forever.
Yes.
I think. I really admire schools and educators and all of the people who come together to work really hard to do the best for students. So you said in the intro that I work from a framework of multi-tiered system of supports. One of the things that I've learned from that I've seen in many schools and read a lot in the research of being really effective is having a school-wide leadership team and the specific decisions that that team makes. So having that team, I think, is the key to the sustainability piece that you asked about. And I think about some examples of places that don't have these, that don't have the resources to have these teams that can meet regularly and have access to high quality data to look at and have access to ongoing professional learning to help them address issues as they come up. And so I think about a couple of schools that I've worked with in the past where teachers will be interested in an evidence-based curriculum or intervention that they want to implement, and they've gone to a conference or listened to a podcast or had found access to a really, really strong evidence-based interventions, but then getting them into place in their school, it's kind of a one-off thing. They have to ask their curriculum director, hey, I want to buy this intervention. Most of the time, teachers spend their own money out of their own pocket to buy those interventions, which in any other field would be crazy that you would have to spend your own money to buy a tool to do your job. So, and then they're like, well, the curriculum director doesn't know. I don't know if this program is good or not. I'm just taking it off of your word to use it. And then so you have a classroom. They're either using it without, talking to other people in their school, or they are using it and they're having really good effects. But then how do they show that what they're doing is working really well? And how do they, was that pathway within the school to get these really effective things spread across the school? So I think one of the mechanisms for that is having a team that understands how to evaluate what's working and what's not working within their school, looking at that data regularly, and really listening to their experts that they have in the school, because we're building more and more expertise within the school building itself. And I think building that expertise within and across the school building, as many people as possible, from teachers to coaches to administrators, that have that high level of knowledge. So not just providing professional development and professional learning to teachers, but also the coaches and the administrators that have influence on these decisions. And then having teams. I've seen a lot of places where they'll have teams come to professional learning together, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you talked about the effectiveness of the reading interventions and if they're actually seeing some effects, how do they demonstrate that? How do they share that news? Like, how do schools think about better evaluating not only the effectiveness of the reading intervention, but which students would benefit most from that specific intervention? And what role does assessment play in that decision making?
Yay, my favorite topic, assessment. I'm the nerd who loves to talk about assessment. So yeah, well, of course you have great questions, Liz. That's why you have this great job and this great platform. I love your questions. So schools need better tools, and it's not their fault that there's not better tools out there, right? The education marketplace has been pretty rough on promoting the tools that work best. But I think a lot about what has been working in the research. So colleague Julie Bremer and I did this literature synthesis on Tier 2 reading interventions, where we wanted to see what worked, of course, in Tier 2, but then more importantly, thinking about in those studies of what worked, how did they decide who got those interventions in schools when they implemented those interventions, and what assessments did they use? And so what we find in research studies is that they select the skill type that the research or that the intervention is addressing, right? So if it's a phonics intervention, they're going to screen the phonics skills of the students in the schools that they're working with. And so they're using really time-intensive assessments, things like the Woodcock-Johnson Reading Mastery Test and some other time-intensive assessments out there, which are great for identifying, okay, here are the kids who need phonics interventions, for example. But in schools, we need a much more
Quicker.
feasible, universal way to measure phonics. Instead of a 1 hour battery for every kid, we need a 10 minute to 20 minute at most battery to identify that. And so there's lots of reading screening assessments out there that are much better now at measuring phonics. But another area is, and one of the studies that I love the most in trying to figure out what interventions work, what specific interventions are going to work for specific students, is Carol Connors and Stephanie Alateba's work in what they did in their studies is they know from research that there's a large need for phonics instruction in K1 and 2, and there's a large need for language comprehension instruction, vocabulary instruction in K1 and 2. And so the things that you're going to do to teach phonics is going to be different than the things that you're going to do to teach vocabulary. And the amount of time that some students need in explicit phonics instruction and explicit vocabulary instruction is different from other students. And so they created a screening assessment that would tell them those two pieces of information, and then created A2I that really gives teachers the number of minutes and how intensive and how explicit that instruction needs to be in either phonics, the code side, or the meaning side, or the meaning side of reading intervention. So, and then you can use, if you have that good assessment that's quicker and more feasible for at the school level versus what we use in research, you can then monitor if it's working for those students that that you specifically sort into one or both of those types of more intensive instruction.
Yeah. It's like you said, the access to the right tools that provide them with the right data is so important. In another area of assessment, you said, you're the assessment nerd. You love assessment. You've also talked about it as a 4-letter word because it gets a lot of bad rap. Can you talk about assessment and how they historically have been used in ways that maybe exclude and marginalize certain student groups, and how we can reframe the use of assessments to better serve all students, especially those from historically underrepresented communities?
Yes, the word test is a 4-letter word, and it has pretty well deserved its rap in its history, right? Its historical use, intelligence testing and other types of assessment has definitely started way back with roots in eugenics, and has consistently been used across time. Even when it has had reforms and improvements, often finding a way to exclude students from public education. And so we've consistently had to put laws in place, right, to keep including students in public education. But I think the way that we try to approach it now, because we need assessment. We can't do our work without it. And so it's really trying to differentiate. Some assessment is built for measuring stable internal traits of an individual. But to move education forward, we need to focus on things that are not stable internal traits of an individual. And oftentimes in history, those stable internal traits have been associated with specific demographic groups. But in education, that's not what we're trying to do. And the assessments that we're using and focusing on are really focusing on malleable, teachable skills for students, and those malleable, teachable skills that we know we can teach, and when we provide that intervention, that it does improve later outcomes for students. One of my most favorite studies is by Benita Blackman, where they implemented reading intervention in 2nd and 3rd grade for students who were performing below grade level. And then they randomly assigned kids to get that intervention or not. And then they were able to luckily study those same students 10 years later when they were graduating from high school, and found that though it wasn't statistically significant because they had a small sample size, but they did find that some of those students were more likely to go to college. They were less likely to need special education services. They were more likely to graduate from high school. So we know that if we can provide this intervention and provide these protective factors and facilitative skills, that it can improve long-term outcomes. So when I talk about assessment, I want to talk about those malleable, teachable skills. and also using that as a means for social justice for groups that have not had access to that type of instruction, right? You've had so many guests on who've talked about the people who can get access to that type of instruction have to seek it outside of the school system. They have to pay a lot of money to professional tutors to be able to find that instruction. My hope for assessment is that we get schools to look at these malleable teachable skills in their assessments so that we can improve social justice, especially to those under-resourced, wealth-stripped schools that have not historically had access to the instruction that gives kids those skills.
Yeah, no. And so you just at the end there, you started to talk about kind of really using this, not only the malleable skills, but looking at maybe one layer down in a subskill profile analysis, talking about how that can potentially give teachers or a clearer roadmap for addressing some of the instructional skill gaps and better understanding why a student is struggling, right? So often we get test results that are at this high level, but then you really need to dig down to figure out which element of that skill, right? So language is a very big bucket. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of that subskill analysis and how teachers can use that to better approach their instructional targets?
Yeah, this is something I dive into every day, and I keep reading and reading and reading and trying to synthesize and pull across different studies to figure out what it is we really need to target and highlight as places to start. Because we always have the criticism, right, that when we look at certain test results that we're teaching to the test and don't have a more comprehensive view of literacy, which is a great point. But we also need places to start, and we also need the places to start that are going to be the most likely to improve later on outcomes and set students on that path to be able to self-generate and self-learn a lot of the other pieces that we might not have enough time to get to because there's only 6 hours in a school day. So we've got to start somewhere, and let's start with the high leverage pieces. And so I've been trying to keep combing the literature and learning where those pieces are. Right now, I think they are, of course, teaching the code, teaching phonics. We know if students can't read the words, they're not going to be able to extract the meaning from what they're reading. So we've done a pretty good job on that piece of things. And then the thing that we are pretty good at assessing is fluency. And we know, like you've had Marianne Wolf, she talks about fluency so well. I can't talk about fluency as well as she does. So go listen to Marianne Wolf talk about reading fluency. But that's a big piece that we need to have in there. And then we're starting to break down vocabulary and break down reading comprehension, which is super exciting. And so one of the ways that we break down reading comprehension is looking at the development of language at the word level, at the sentence level, and at the text or discourse level.
Yeah, I think absolutely the sentence level to me is like the missing key. When you think about comprehension, people often think about decoding, which is more at the word level, right? You're decoding these individual words, and then reading comprehension, which is the whole text. And people skip over the syntax or that sentence level component where a single 3-letter word, if it says and versus but, like what's coming after that sentence, and that can change the whole meaning of the sentence. And if you have several sentences that they're not comprehending, how are they going to comprehend the whole piece? So I am also excited that more and more people are starting to break down. You've also referenced Dr. Young Suk Kim's interactive dynamic literacy model a lot in your work. And we've had Young on our podcast. Young's another fellow FCRR alum. She explained her model, but how does this model help teachers think more holistically about the component skills of reading, and how can schools apply it to assess and improve their instruction?
Yeah, I am obsessed with that interactive dynamic literacy model. We're living in such a cool time right now that it's right when all of this work is happening that she put this out. So I'm really excited to build upon that. I love it because it's a more comprehensive model. So it really nicely addresses the appropriate criticism. The simple view is really helpful because we absolutely need that first place to start. And her model encompasses the simple view, which I think is really helpful. And it also acknowledges the complexity of both reading and writing. And it is the thing that I love so much about it is it really defines those pieces of language comprehension, to your point, Liz. And it defines how language comprehension and decoding are reciprocal and how they build upon each other throughout development. Because a lot of our models in writing especially have been based on mature writing. And so this is a developmental model, which is so cool because it shows how, in order to get to that mature, fluid, strategic use of both our reading and writing skills, it shows that there are these developmental components. And I like how she defines them, because then that gives us instructional targets. So some people have talked about this using different terms, like the science of teaching reading is different from the science of learning reading. And I think that's fascinating. I think Young gives us a really useful place to start from, because she defines those components. Like the way that you're going to teach vocabulary is going to look very different than the instructional moves you need to make to teach grammar. And those are very different than the instructional moves that you need to take to make sure that students get a wide exposure to background knowledge and lots of content pieces. But also how your building of vocabulary influences your background knowledge acquisition. So I think that it provides these teaching targets. And so one of the things that I've done to build on Young's model is to define what those teaching targets look like, and to define what a student's component skill development looks like in a classroom. So I love her model because it's based on real kids, like it's lots of data from real kids, and she uses those gold standard assessments of those constructs, of those subcomponents. And so that's really helpful to define that. But then in a classroom, we're not using those types of assessments, right? And so my work has been focused on how do we measure those in a classroom, in a reading assessment and in a writing assessment, so that teachers can see that development. It makes the learning visible. It makes the development visible to the teachers of what the students are able to do with their phonics, word reading and spelling skills, what they're able to do with their vocabulary, both receptive and written vocabulary, what they're able to do with at that sentence level. We hit those connective words that you were just talking about. And, but, for example, however, all of those words, right? Like we're looking for those and we're showing teachers, here's students' development with these pieces. And then at the text level, every genre has its own structure of text. And so we're making those structures visible of here's where your students are in their current state of development. And then this is the instructional target for how you're going to teach text structure different than you're going to teach grammar, then you're going to teach vocabulary, then you're going to teach spelling. And so here's how you do that.
Yeah, it's, again, I think to your point, it's a really exciting time for this model to come out as, people are focusing, they're getting the professional learning, starting to build their own knowledge and go beyond just the simple view, although really important to know that's a good starting place. And so you talked a lot about assessment, and then you were talking about your work in writing. It's another big area for you, which I'd love for you to talk a little bit more. You've mentioned that there's a significant gap in materials, particularly around teaching those text structures, which you were just talking about. So can you elaborate on the challenges teachers face when they're trying to teach informational writing and the role of structured or explicit instruction in overcoming these barriers?
Yeah. So I'm in the fourth year of a 4-year IES, Institute for Education Science, funded project that I'm leading. It's called The Writing Architect. And so The Writing Architect is the name of the tool that pulls together assessing students' development in these key areas of writing, and then links directly to evidence-based instructional practices that have an impact on those key components. And so with that project, I've been so lucky to have incredible partners in the classrooms that we're in. So in the last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to go in and work side by side with teachers in 50 classrooms in 4th and 5th grade. And it's been super fun. These teachers are just incredible. Their creativity in implementing really cool morphology, vocabulary instruction, and getting their students interested in text structure. Like this is where, and informational text, right? I want kids so badly to get informational text because we know from across the research how important background knowledge, content knowledge, getting science and social studies knowledge, and again, my heart being in science of let's make sure we diversify the science workforce. But that's a tangent. But yeah, they're doing all this stuff to make it so exciting, and then when they get stuck, they just don't have the materials to help them with that. And it just really struck me how I came in with all of these assumptions that their curricular materials already had all of the things. So for example, for text structure, we use the TIDE, TIDE, acronym for informational text structure. So this comes out of work from Karen Harris, Allison Collins, and Leslie Laud, where they find that informational text, you have a topic sentence, you have ideas, that's the I. There's several ideas that they present. There's details that tie those ideas to the topic sentence, and then E for ending. There's an ending. So, what I found is that teachers, when they get stuck, they just don't have the materials to help them with that. And it just really struck me how I came in with all of these assumptions that their curricular materials already had all of the things. So for example, for text structure, we use the TIDE, acronym for informational text structure. So this comes out of work from Karen Harris, Allison Collins, and Leslie Laud, where they find that informational text, you have a topic sentence, you have ideas, that's the I. There's several ideas that they present. There's details that tie those ideas to the topic sentence, and then E for ending. There's an ending. So I was like, okay, these are kind of, generally understood.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good
Component
acronym.
text structure. And so I just assumed that there would be this in the curriculum. Well, first of all, there's not much informational text in 4th and 5th grade curriculum, even though there's 3 major writing standards. You write narrative text, you write opinion text, and you write informational text in response to text. And writing in response to text and informational response in response to text is tested in almost every state test. Yet there's one unit on informational writing in most of the ELA curricula that we were looking at. So I was like, oh, okay, well, let's see if we can integrate this structure into the other pieces of the curriculum that they have, because that's what they've got and that's what they have to teach. And so, for example, we went in and watched an amazing teacher. The lesson for the day was Tall Tales. And the students, the assignment for that was for the students to write a tall tale. And the teacher asked, what makes this a tall tale? And one of the kids raised their hand, because the character is tall.
Well,
yes, of course.
Yes.
But there was nothing in her curricular materials to tell what the structure of a tall
to
tale
set
was.
the foundation to build that. Yes.
There was no definition. I watched another teacher who was doing a really great job pulling out the topic sentence of an article, and she had to add that herself to the curriculum. But then a student asked, well, what is a topic sentence? And she had to, on the spot, try to come up with a definition for a topic sentence. It wasn't in any of her materials, and I hadn't given it to her. And so that was a huge aha for me, is we've got to get the definitions of these things into the materials. And they're really good at teaching hooks, but topic sentence, if you really sit down and think about it, is very different than a hook, and it's much harder to teach. So I pointed to this like, oh, wow, I've got a lot of work to do to make materials much more usable.
Well, and you've done so much work in both reading and writing, and I think we don't often connect those enough for our educators. To your point, a lot of the ELA curriculum is focused heavily on the reading side, not a lot of the writing side. Other than helping provide some explicit instructional units on the writing and the components of writing, I love the TIDE acronym. Of course, we love our acronyms in education. And you can see, even I see my nephews, using their graphic organizers or their acronyms that they've been taught in writing. But what are some tips or key takeaways that educators should try to consider as they're trying to connect the cohesive way that reading and writing really work together?
Yeah, I like using writing as additional opportunities for students to respond. So we know that providing children as much opportunities to practice and get feedback on using their newly developed skills is absolutely essential for them to master those malleable skills within literacy. And so anytime that you're teaching reading, there is a co-occurring skill in writing that will reinforce that reading piece. And we have lots of studies. One of my favorite studies, Abbott and Berninger and Fayol from 2010, where they show a reciprocal influence of word reading and spelling with each other, and then reading comprehension and written text structure with each other, that so we know that from the research that it works. We also know it from Young's interactive dynamic literacy model, right? In her word level, she has word reading and spelling together. So if you're teaching word reading and phonics, include opportunities for students to spell those words, and they will have a reciprocal influence on each other. Steve Graham has quite a bit of research showing that when we teach writing and we improve students' writing skills using, for example, self-regulated strategy development, that has an impact on not just reading comprehension, but also reading fluency. It has an impact on science achievement. It has an impact on social studies achievement. So by teaching writing, we have that mechanism of giving students more opportunities to respond. We have that reciprocal relationship between the component skills of reading and writing. And then we have the broader knowledge, gathering knowledge, right? Knowledge building that's so important within the content. And so one of our future projects is really integrating what we know about writing instruction into science instruction. And so that's where I'm finding a much better opportunity because, like I said, with the ELA curriculum, we can hopefully we can get people to expand the amount of informational text and informational writing that's happening in the ELA curriculum, but then bring in the science curriculum. That's all informational text, so that's great. And one of my students, who's now an assistant professor at Utah State University, Dr. Cherish Sarmiento, she did the coolest dissertation where she worked with a team of teachers, an ELA teacher and a science teacher, to use the same language comprehension instructional practices across the ELA classroom and the science classroom to try to bring writing about science as a way to build both their ELA skills and their science skills.
Wow. I think that reciprocal relationship is so important. And I think a lot of teachers hear about don't teach decoding in isolation, always bring meaning. But I think the other piece is it's an opportunity to bring encoding or spelling, right? So don't just work on the decoding, work on the encoding. And it's a window, right? Both their written expression and their spelling abilities are a wealth of information in terms of assessment and understanding their areas of strengths and opportunities for growth. So I love that idea too of making sure that we're not just thinking about your reading class or your ELA class, but across science, social studies, certainly with informational text. But even just yesterday, I was talking to somebody about math, and a lot of states are like, well, we're going to focus on math now, not reading. But I think it was Lynn Fielding's book where he talked about around 85% of the curriculum is delivered via reading. So when you say, I'm not going to work on reading, I'm going to work on math, what is that reciprocal relation? And similarly, in science and social studies, this informational text. So what you're saying is so important. I love the idea of team teaching and both using the same structure, the same explicit instruction in how to address informational text. And also the other piece about extra response rates, right? There's so much research on how few responses students get in the classroom usually. And I love how Anita Archer talks about, I say something, you say something, I write something, you write something, right? Like that constant ability to have additional responses. And I don't think many teachers, I know because it's not in the materials, I know myself included, writing is almost seen as a separate thing. And oftentimes it doesn't get addressed because there's so much to do in the reading. So I love how you talked about that relationship. And to your point, the data that drove Young's model shows that reciprocal relationship, as well as a lot of your work and others around that reciprocal relationship in somebody's reading and writing abilities.
There was like 3 different quotes in there, Liz, that I am going to go grab the transcript of this and quote you on that. Those were so good.
Well, some of them were from other people, but it's so important. Again, the idea that across the curriculum, reading is throughout, and you can't focus on one without the other, right? Even math problems, the word reading is so impactful. So in helping not only teachers, but schools and districts and states understand that how reading is the foundation for their curriculum, their, work across the curriculum. So
what a great point. There's some really cool math writing people right now too, who are doing really neat work on math writing. So we'll have to highlight that at some point.
Yes. And so just a few more questions. It's been such an amazing conversation with you today. And we're excited, kind of coming back to where we started with the idea of school-based leadership teams. We're so excited that you're going to be joining us as a panelist during our Science of Reading Week. I believe your session is on March 4th, so people mark your calendars. And you're going to be on a panel discussing the transformative role that school and district leaders can play in implementing evidence-based practices. You've highlighted that those practices often, right, aren't accompanied by the necessary materials, but this is maybe a little teaser to what you might talk about on the panel. But how can schools and districts begin to assess where these gaps exist in their curricula or their assessments, and what steps can they take to fill those gaps in a systematic way?
Another $1 million question that I think I will answer differently, hopefully 15 years from now, when we've done more research, that we've been able to continue partnering with districts. And something that has been the best part of our job is that we get to partner with districts and listening to the real questions that people have and trying to work together to answer those. And so 2 places that I look at right now are what is the content of our curriculum assessment, and then also then when we're teaching, how we do that teaching. And so to look at the content of our curriculum, that's really hard. Every semester, I work with master students who are current teachers, who are becoming leaders of MTSS in their buildings. And so they're always taking a look at their Tier 1 curriculum for reading and math, and they're saying we have so much in these curricular materials that we have to stick to, right? Our expectation is to have fidelity to the curriculum, but to what part of the curriculum? There's so many materials that are given to teachers. How do they pick out what to use? And so one of the exercises that we do in my class, and I know a lot of states are also doing this exercise, and school districts are doing this exercise, is to identify the content that's going to be the most high leverage content in their curriculum. They're using some tools. There's 2 example tools that I always point to. One of them is from the Regional Education Laboratory Southeast. Of course, our friends at Florida State, who created a really nice tool that identifies the content that you should see in the curricula. And when you see it, you should pull it out and use those pieces. And then the Reading League recently put out an excellent tool that identifies red flags of which pieces of the curricula that are lower value, and you don't really need to use those pieces that are weed those out. One really amazing example of a district here in Michigan, I've been very impressed with the Detroit Public Schools Community District has done a really amazing job of weeding through curricula. So they took the EL curricula, the expeditionary learning curricula that's on the Ed Reports list, rated pretty highly on the Ed Reports list. And they talked to their teachers and they said, hey, what do you need to actually implement this? Because this is this big, unwieldy curriculum. And so the teachers are like, I need PowerPoint materials that I can just grab them because I have so much other planning to do. I need to just grab it and go and not spend my weekends sifting through and figuring out on my own what to do. And so if you go on to Detroit's website, you can, every single person can go download their entire curriculum. It's all in PowerPoints. It's all nicely distilled for each grade level. You just click the grade level and download the whole thing. And so I love that they listen to the teachers. And to your question, your original question about this, I think schools and districts really need to listen and specifically ask their teachers, what are the barriers to putting this in place? What do you need to actually make this happen? As opposed to like switching around from a accountability type of approach and switch it to what are the barriers? Right. How can we
partnership approach? Yeah.
Yeah, because there's something you're missing and we don't know what it is and only you can tell us. So
right. Because oftentimes, the school or the district leaders are purchasing or in the conversations with, either the superintendent or the school board who are purchasing these programs. Sometimes they've done pilots with their teachers and that's how they recommend which ones to purchase. Other times they purchase it and then ask them, or they need to make sure they ask them once it's starting to get implemented. So I love that example and kudos to that school for doing that. We'll also share those links to the REL Southeast document that you mentioned and the Reading League document. We'll reference those in our show notes. So as we wrap up, we always, again, we start with where did your journey begin? And we try to end, we can talk about there's plenty of challenges, but there's also tremendous forward momentum. And so when you think about the world of reading and writing and implementation science and MTSS, what makes you most hopeful for the future of literacy?
Yeah, two groups of people make me super hopeful. One of them was when I moved to Michigan. I had never been in Michigan before, but I'd been in so many other states working with schools and state level systems and other places. When I came to Michigan, the teachers' hunger to do something more and to improve their practice and to seek out additional learning opportunities just blew me away. So I am really, really excited for the advocacy efforts of teachers, especially here in Michigan. Across the board, the people who listen to your podcast and to the other podcasts has made me really excited for the future of education. I think it's really coming from the ground up from teachers and from parents. That's been exciting to me. And then the other group that I'm really excited about are I have a bunch of doctoral students that are in my lab, and then I get to get the amazing opportunity to teach the doctoral students in special education and school psychology here, as well as I'm a part of the National Center for Leadership in Intensive Intervention. And this is across 7 universities. And the research that these folks are doing and tackling these really, really hard questions is foremost on their mind. And I'm really excited to see what they do and to continue to evolve our science, because the science is not standing still. And I think it's going to accelerate very quickly with the really brilliant minds, many of them coming from the classroom, to apply that to research. So I'm super grateful for that.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, you are one of the researchers that inspires me and gives me hope when you think about all of the realistic ways that the science needs to be applied in the schools, and your work is so comprehensive and thoughtful and inclusive. So I thank you so much for the work you're doing, but also for taking the time to talk with us today to share all of the knowledge and the idea that this science is not stopping. As I hope everybody understands that now, that the science of reading is not this thing that is done. And you shared so many amazing examples today of your work and your colleagues' work. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to share that expertise with us.
Thank you for this exciting platform, Liz. We need it so much. This is also part of the science of reading going forward and becoming better because you created this. So thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. And thanks to our listeners for joining Adrea and me today on the All for Literacy podcast. The conversations we're having with educators across the country are crucial in shaping the future of literacy education. And we hope you'll join us to continue that conversation with us on March 3rd through 6th, 2025, this coming year, for your Science of Reading journey from discovery to transformation. We mentioned that Adrea is going to join us on March 4th for one of those panels. There's going to be something for district, school, and teachers, all levels, some amazing keynote speakers as well. It is a journey, and we're all on different paths, different parts of that path. And you'll find the link to explore that event in today's episode description. So together we can ensure that every student has access to the literacy education they deserve. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the All for Literacy podcast.